Chapter 16. After the slightly rocky start, Hans was now getting quite comfortable as temporary leader of Arendelle. With the help of Gerda and the other household staff, he had turned the Great Hall into a relief station, complete with warm clothes and food to comfort both the townsfolk who couldn't reach their homes and the many foreign guests who were now trapped in the frozen kingdom. He had just a few more things to take care of inside before he could go back out and announce that the relief station was open. It had only been a few hours since Queen Elsa had turned the world white, and already things inside the kingdom's walls were beginning to descend into chaos. In the courtyard, Hans had seen men and women fighting over scraps of wood while their children stood by shivering. He had seen one sneaky-looking young man blatantly take a pile of wood when the people fighting were too busy to notice. And really, it wouldn't matter if they were fighting or not. Wood was scarce. He had considered sending men out to gather firewood, but it was the dead of night, and he didn't want to risk losing anyone in the darkness. When their supply of wood ran out, that would be it till morning. That was why Hans was pleased to offer people a warmer place to go for the night. True, the Great Hall was drafty in the relentless wind, and even the thickest of windows and curtains couldn't keep out the strong chill, but it was better than nothing. Yes, Hans thought as he checked the glog one more time to make sure it was hot. This will be just what the people need, and just what I need, he mused, to ensure that my position becomes less temporary and more permanent. I wonder how Anna is doing, he thought suddenly. Pondering his future position here in Arendelle made it impossible not to think of his fiancée. She clearly hadn't found her sister yet, as the snow was still falling. Or if she had, things weren't going well. Elsa's powers were impressive, and Anna had none. If the pair were to face off, well, it most likely wouldn't end well for his betrothed. The thought of something happening to Anna sent a shiver down his spine. If she didn't come back, how would he secure control of Arendelle? Hearing a noise behind him, he turned and saw Gerda entering the Great Hall. She was holding out a pile of cloaks. He nodded. It was time to get outside and help his people. Hans made his way out of the castle and down into the crowd. "Cloak," he called out. "Does anyone need a cloak?" The people flocked to him, their arms outstretched. Soon people were thanking him and trying to hug him. They were no longer questioning who he was. Now Hans heard people calling him savior and hero. "Arendelle is indebted to you, your highness," Gerda said. She had been beside him the entire time, and now she looked up at him, a smile on her face. Hans smiled back at Gerda, pleased by how natural your highness sounded as she addressed him. He looked back at the crowd. "The castle is open," he said, his voice loud and steady. "There's soup and hot glug in the Great Hall. Please, go in and get warm." Instantly, a wave of people rushed past Hans, jostling to be the first ones inside. However, not everyone was eager to get to the soup. Hans spotted the Duke of Wesselton and his 2 men lurking nearby. A few of the other visiting dignitaries stood across the courtyard from him. While most of them looked genuinely concerned about the state of Arendelle and its people, the Duke had his hands on his hips and was watching the scene unfold with disdain. It seemed now was a good time to take a few moments to visit Arendelle's esteemed guests. The last thing Hans wanted was the Duke talking to them first. Turning to a guard who stood nearby, Hans handed the man a stack of cloaks. "Here, pass these out to anyone who still needs them," he ordered. As Hans approached the dignitaries, he mentally reviewed quick backgrounds on each. Once again, it seemed all his preparation for this visit was paying off. He saw the representative from Zaria, a thin, reedy man with a huge beard that reached past his belt. That, Hans knew, was a sign of wealth in the man's kingdom. He would be good to have as an ally. He was one of the most respected men here, also not exactly the most outgoing of sorts. Next to him was Prince Wells, who certainly was the outgoing sort. Despite the rather dreary situation, he made a comment to Prince Verluc that Hans couldn't make out and then burst into laughter. Hans tried not to smile. The man's laugh sounded like a little girl's. Gaining his support was not of great importance to Hans. Vakrena was a small kingdom with little to offer in the way of power or trade. Moving on, he spotted the Lord of Kongsberg as well as the representatives from Lavinia and Eldora. Of the three, these were the two dignitaries who Hans wanted to win over. The Lord of Kongsberg was too powerful. He wouldn't need to listen to Hans, whereas the dignitaries would be more eager to gain power. The Bavarian was practically his already. Their country was significantly in debt to the Southern Isles, and Hans was skilled at collecting what was owed him. Hans smiled to himself. Knowing a little bit about each of the men put him at a distinct advantage. They, he was sure, knew nothing of him. Why would they? Up until today, he had been nothing more than a 13th son. But he was about to prove how little that mattered now. Stopping in front of the group of men, Hans bowed. The men followed suit. Good sirs, Hans began, I'm sorry that this is not quite the celebration we had in mind. I do hope we have been able to make you as comfortable as possible given the situation. Quite so, bubbled Prince Wales. Who doesn't like a little snow in summer? I, for one, the Lord of Kongsberg replied. Prince Hans, have you any word from the princess? How much longer do you suppose we will have to wait for her return? I have people at home who will not be pleased by a long absence, and I find the whole thing rather suspicious. What's the rule in all this? I am doing all in my power to... What power? The Lord snapped back. You have no real power besides what was handed to you by a silly little princess in over her head. I will not be made a fool. If this is all some grand scheme to keep us trapped here in Arendelle, I will make you suffer. Now, Prince Will said, his face distraught the Lord's words. There is no need for such threats, is there? What point would there be in keeping us here? I'm sure Prince Hans is doing everything he can. Prince Hans? The Lord shouted back. I have never heard that name before today, and yet look at him, running around as though he were king. It makes one suspicious. Hans knew he had to regain control of the conversation, and fast. If the Lord convinced the others of his doubts, it could mean ruin. A sudden surge of anger welled up at Hans, and he forced it back down. This was not the time to let emotion rule. So the Lord of Kongsberg was a bully. Hans had grown up with 12 bullies. He knew just how to deal with them, and the number one rule was never let them see you sweat. Turn the bullying back on the bully. Like his father had taught him, the best thing to do in a situation like this was act like a mirror. Enough! Hans said, silencing the Lord instantly. Do not think for a moment that just because you hold power in some faraway kingdom, you can come here and treat me like a child. I am a prince. I am a prince betrothed to the princess of this kingdom. Do not dare question me or my motives. My motives are simple. Protect Arendelle. We should be working together to help Arendelle, not fighting amongst each other like whales over a seal. He stopped and took a breath. Now, instead of throwing barbs, don't you think our time would be best spent offering up suggestions on how to fix our current problem? For a moment, the Lord said nothing. He just looked at Hans as though for the first time. Then he bowed his head ever so slightly. I'm sorry, Prince Hans. You do indeed seem to have the situation well under control. I suppose all we can do is wait for Princess Anna's safe return. Yes, that was my thought exactly, Hans said, trying not to smile. Bullying the bully. He would have to remember to thank his brothers the next time he saw them. This was probably the first time in his whole life they had actually helped. Now the whole group was looking to him for guidance. He would just have to spend a little more one-on-one time with a few of them, and then he would have not only control of Arendelle, but allies to boot. Unfortunately, there was still one large, or rather one quite small, person who could get in his way. Hearing footsteps behind him, Hans turned to see the Duke of Wesselton approaching. Well, this should be interesting, he said over his shoulder to the other men. I never trusted that man, Prince Will said softly. Never trusted him one bit. Neither do I, Prince Wales, Hans said, but I suppose we should hear him out. His mustache worries me, the elder dignitary added. It's just so bushy. Looks like an animal. Laughing in agreement, Hans squared his shoulders and, with newfound confidence, turned back just as the Duke came to a stop in front of him. Prince Hans, the Duke began immediately, are we expected to sit here and freeze while you give away all of Arendelle's tradable goods? And not a shut-down bully number 2, Hans thought. Princess Anna has given her orders and... The Duke cut him off. That's another thing, he said, sneering. Has it dawned on you that your princess may be conspiring with the wicked sorceress to destroy us all? Instantly, Hans's expression went from obliging to icy. Do not question the princess, he said, his tone as dark as when he had cut down the Lord of Kongsberg. She left me in charge, and I will not hesitate to protect Arendelle from treason. Treason? The Duke repeated, looking confused and suddenly slightly scared. Hans nodded and was about to explain just what he meant when he heard the sound of hooves clattering over ice. A moment later, Anna's horse galloped into sight. He was covered in sweat and breathing heavily. The saddle was tilted to the side, and one stirrup was missing. Grabbing the reins, Hans began to soothe the horse. But he needed soothing as well. Something had happened to Anna. Turning, he saw that the men were now looking at him, their frightened faces mirroring his own. Without Anna, he had nothing. What was he going to do now?